In 2007, Rockstar Games was in some hot water because of a little game called Manhunt 2. Rockstar is no stranger to controversy, as you probably already know. The original Manhunt also received a similar reception by the mainstream media. In spite of the media storm, I thought the original game was not only a phenomenal commentary on violence in the interactive medium, but also a fantastic horror game in its own right, and I made a video discussing it if you haven't seen it yet. However, Manhunt 2 was different. The ESRB gave it their highly uncommon adults-only rating due to the level of graphic violence present. A rating that was only previously applied to games containing, well, you know. Double standards aside, why did this game receive an adults-only rating when the original game got off the hook? Well, I believe this happened for many reasons. Manhunt 2 deviates far too much from the properly contextualized violence of the original game, to the point where I felt a lot of this game just comes across as ridiculous and tasteless. Now, let's find out why this game fell flat on its face. I'm Liam Triforce, and I'm going to be explaining to you where I felt Manhunt 2 went wrong. Have you ever been curious about the psychological state of a serial killer? Have you ever wondered what warps them and turns them into a monster? Have you ever been curious as to how paranoid schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder alters someone's life? If so, I'm sure you'll be disappointed to find out that Manhunt 2 offers a very piss-poor glimpse into all of these paradigms. It all starts with Daniel Lamb, a patient at a high-security psychiatric hospital undergoing evaluation for his illness and remaining restricted for his crimes. The moment the cells open after a power outage, and the first thing you see is the character you're about to control murder an innocent doctor, the whole game just falls apart. I want this scene to set the tone for my entire video because yes, Manhunt 2 is that tasteless. Let's go back to the context of the first game for a second so we have a point of contrast. Rockstar North managed to create something so insanely corrupt that the violence in the game was contextualized well. Not justified, of course, but contextualized. The character you control is death row inmate James Earl Cash. However, they leave his past crimes ambiguous and make sure that everyone he is forced to kill is devoid of morality and hell-bent on executing Cash. The gangs are trained killers known for their traits such as pedophilia, white supremacy, and psychosis. And among them is the sick fuck that derives sexual excitement from it all, Lionel Starkweather. Even the corrupt police force is under his employment. He hasn't told the people working for him that he intends for everyone to be killed by Cash. He set the stage for his film, and now Cash has to murder everyone in his path without remorse. They're fucked up people and they want you dead, but the brutality that's forced upon you is a great horror element. The snuff film setting is exaggerated, but it feels all too real upon playing the game. Also, Cash himself is in touch with his sense of right and wrong. He's willing to assist innocent people in escaping Starkweather's snuff film ring. He makes sure that upon killing his enemies, their deaths are swift so the pain doesn't last long. Does that make him a good person? Absolutely not. But it makes him the most morally sound person in this shit show, aside from the innocent people, of course. In this game, Danny does feel remorse for his actions, because those actions are being forced by Leo Casper, his alternate personality. Danny is suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder. At first, I thought this would be a great story element, if they could handle Danny's illness effectively. They didn't. Instead, it's painfully obvious that all of the illusions that Danny encounters are illusions. Their dialogue only echoes what's already going on in Danny's head. Leo himself is such a one-note prick that it's blatant he isn't real. Whenever Danny asks Leo why he's doing what he's doing, the response is always, "It's the project! They want us dead!"
Wait a minute. I used to live around here.
Not anymore, Danny, but there's something in that house we need. Something you left for yourself. We've got to be quick. This is the first place the project will look for us.
Wait, how do you know all this?
Danny, listen. It's a manhunt, and they won't stop until we're both dead.
And the same goes for everyone he imagines is really there. When Danny is looking for someone that can help him reclaim his memories, he heads into the hangout for a sex cult. Why? Why would this person ever actually be in a sex dungeon? It's his doctor! The more this happens, the more I question what genre this game actually falls under. I don't think it should be horror because I find it hard to recall ever being scared by this game. Is it a parody of horror? Is it a black comedy game with stealth just thrown in for funsies? And it gets worse. Are you ready for this hot garbage? This project that Leo is referring to is the Pickman Project, an organization led by Dr. Pickman. No, not that Pickman. Their experiments were unconventional, to say the least. They wanted to implant a personality into someone's brain that could be triggered on command using the Pikmin bridge. No, not that kind of Pikmin bridge. However, when Danny volunteered to take part in the experiment, this went haywire and Leo and Danny could communicate. Thus, Danny's already crumbling mental state and private life would take a fatal turn as Leo took over. Let's step back for a second. Does Rockstar think we're all dense? Are they trying to convince a child that this would work under any realistic circumstance? When it comes to horror experiences, believability should be a #1 priority. No ifs, ands, or buts. If I don't perceive what's going on as believable or relatable, it's not going to affect me. Thus, when it comes to getting under the player's skin, you've lost completely. It's not like it's a science fiction game with horror elements, i.e. Half-Life, where your suspension of disbelief is at a comfortable limit. This is supposed to be horror at its core, a psychological horror experience. On top of that, Half-Life leaves the source of Zen and its technology ambiguous, which makes them interesting plot devices. Manhunt 2 tries to say, oh, it's hypnosis that caused the Pikmin bridge, which is bullshit. Manhunt 2 couldn't get under my skin with this amount of ridiculousness present. I'm not talking about the gameplay though. I realize that most of what happens in the levels you play through can lead to some intense moments, despite its shortcomings, that of which we'll cover. It's the plot and setting of Manhunt 2 that ended up being absolute shit, and brings down the entire experience to an overwhelmingly stupid level. Let's look at a much better depiction of schizophrenia for a moment, and spoilers for A Beautiful Mind coming up. In this movie, John Nash's paranoid hallucinations are represented in the visual medium with real people. People with schizophrenia don't see things. Their delusional way of thinking makes them perceive reality differently. Since this would most likely be the general audience's first exposure to Nash's story, they needed to make sure that the things floating through his mind could be perceived as real. Otherwise, there'd be no suspense and there'd be no emotional hook. Charles Herman is the first glimpse we get into this world, and the man encourages Nash's research, assisting him in breaking new ground in mathematics by refusing to conform to the groundwork set by their university. He helps Nash come up with his own original idea. At first, this person seems to be helping more than hurting. Charles even encourages Nash to propose to the woman he was dating. We, as the audience, don't see anything wrong here. Charles just seems like a great guy. Unfortunately, Nash's mental state deteriorates as he begins to witness a series of terrifying events that didn't actually happen. Nash's breakdown, discovery, and treatment of his illness hits him with an emotional brick, and it's just as much of a shock to him as it is to the audience. Imagine a friend that you thought you'd known for years never existed in the first place. In the film, the breakdown of what it means to have this illness without knowing it is incredible, and I would have loved to see this be represented in a video game too. However, regardless of whether or not they wanted to try this, Manhunt is the worst series they could have done this with. They're utilizing the illness as an excuse for murder. You can't excuse murder. Even when someone is sentenced for it, if they're declared not guilty by reason of insanity, they're immediately relocated to a psychiatric hospital to both treat them and keep the public safe from them because they could still pose a threat. No one was in the right when it came to the original Manhunt, aside from the reporter trying to expose Starkweather. The game never attempted to justify the murders. That's what made the game such a fantastic commentary on violence in the media. Manhunt 2, for some ungodly reason, is the exact opposite. Was Rockstar's aim with Manhunt 2 to convince us to empathize with the criminally insane, and attempt to understand where they're coming from? Yes, Danny shows remorse for his actions sometimes, but you're still carrying out the murders despite everything. There's a difference between treating a serial killer with dissociative identity disorder and paranoid schizophrenia, and having the player control that person. Like I said in my video on the first game, Manhunt is one of the few games to make you understand and fear the act of killing an enemy in a game. However, Manhunt 2 puts you in the shoes of someone who loves it, killing people who don't usually deserve it. Imagine playing as Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. Manhunt 2 isn't far off. I get it, Danny is sick, and his mental state was already taking a nosedive due to the pressure of his work. But who is the judicial system supposed to keep off the streets? Danny, because Leo doesn't exist. That's just how it works. He'll be taken off the streets, treated, and in turn the world will be a safer place. But does the existence of Leo excuse his killings? I shouldn't have to answer that for you.
Let's compare and contrast the two protagonists of Manhunt though. How does each game treat its respective character? In the previous video, I put a lot of emphasis on the emotional disconnect the game creates between the player and James Earl Cash. Most player characters are vessels in a sense. They can take on or adopt personalities and characteristics based on how the player wants to experience the game, and vice versa. This doesn't have to be restricted to silent protagonists. This carries over into story-driven games. If the game allows you to do more within its boundaries as that character, the character evolves with you. One of the best games I've seen handle this philosophy is, believe it or not, Naruto Rise of a Ninja for the Xbox 360. Naruto's personal goal is to have everyone acknowledge him in his village. Okay, so how can we help him with that? Well, by clearing more of the quests in the Leaf Village, the townspeople begin to say hi to you and greet you, and are much more pleasant and eager to help you with your missions. Not only that, but the quests reward you with more experience and supplies. There's the trade-off. My time with the game is much more enjoyable because I was able to assist my main character in achieving his goal. The connection between the player and the game is extremely important, and I love when games exemplify this. Manhunt acknowledges this, and instead makes sure that you are not James Earl Cash. You aren't a killer, Cash is. You aren't a part of this, you're watching it transpire helplessly. They make sure of this in different ways. Cash is cold and emotionless, and kills enemies remorselessly. Not because he wants to, but because he's forced to. Again, he helps innocent people escape. The game makes you feel like an outsider, as virtually no one in it can be sided with on a moral level. The game is grotesque to make you realize the horror of what you're playing. That's what made Manhunt work so well. The emotional disconnect between player and character that creates the feeling of watching a snuff film that you have no influence over. You can't stop it. And yet, you're still controlling Cash's every move, carrying out these murders scene by scene to ultimately end the murder spree. That's terrifying. Manhunt 2 doesn't ever reach those heights, and it creates a protagonist that any sensible human being shouldn't be relating to. Yet they attempt to make you care about him anyway. For some reason, they want you to force Leo out of his head and somehow cleanse Danny of his sins. Let's get something straight here. The first time I see Danny, he strangles an innocent doctor. Yes, he has mental health issues, and yes, Leo is taking over his mind. But he still murdered someone for no reason. Regardless of who is in control, this is the character you're playing as. The game wants you to turn Danny's situation around, whereas the original game only asked you to stop the snuff film ring. It asked you nothing of Cash. You were allowed to form your own opinion of him. This is the primary reason Manhunt 2 doesn't work. It asks you to care about the person that is killing these people. No matter what you might say, the context of a Manhunt game needs to be reasoned so that A, the people you have to kill are trying to kill you and nothing else, and B, the main character isn't someone you can root for. Danny and Leo are separate people, I get that, but you're still controlling the person that is killing people just to get to the end of the game and save themselves. Do you not see what's wrong with that? I don't want a positive perspective on killers with dissociative identity disorder. They're still killing people who don't need to die. Hell, Leo was supposed to be an assassin, not a mass murderer. Is all of this happening because his trained killer personality and Danny's anger management issues mixed? If that's the case, this game should not be written like it is. You shouldn't be controlling Danny or Leo. The two of them create an antagonist. Manhunt 2's setting isn't just bad, it's horrendous. It not only attempts to excuse what's happening, but also attempts to make you care about the killer you're controlling. Bottom line, even if Danny's personality is good, I can't take on the role of someone like him because of Leo. I want to get rid of him, but not because I want to help Danny. It's because I want the murder to end. That's how I felt in the original Manhunt, and that's why the emotional disconnect between you and Cash was so important. Here, the end of the game feels like an obligation, not a reward. So now we know they fucked up in regards to the setting, but let's at least analyze the situations Danny gets himself into for a second. I mentioned how the people he kills don't deserve to die most of the time, and yeah, the context for most of the murders are bad.
In the hospital, the nurses are fighting to keep Danny back in his cell. Why are they punching him? Oh, because this is a bad place with bad people running it. Sure, why not? It's bad reasoning, but it'll do. There are some pretty awful mental hospitals out there. There are gangs chasing Danny because they want the bounty. Okay, fine. Danny needs to run into a sex dungeon to find someone that can help him get his past back. Why is he killing the people in there? Well, it's not apparent that they have a fetish for killing people at first, but since that fact is eventually revealed, I'll let it slide. Now how about the people that are just defending themselves like the scientists, the cops, or poor Michael? How do you contextualize that, huh? These people are chasing down a wanted murderer who has shown that he doesn't want to surrender, and is absolutely merciless in the methods he kills his victims. In fact, can we just compare with the first game for a second, just to see how sickening the murders in Manhunt 2 can get? Danny, or Leo, makes sure that his victims feel immense pain before dying, as if there's satisfaction involved. Meanwhile, Cash makes sure that his victims die quickly, with fatal blows being dealt as soon as possible with the weapons he has. I don't want to watch the executions in Manhunt 2. They're that gruesome, and without proper context, they don't have a purpose other than to be disturbing with no purpose. The exact same thing the first game avoided doing so damn well. It also doesn't help that the Wii and PC versions have you carry out the motions of killing people using the Wii's motion controls and QuickTime events on PC. Make sure you thrust the syringe into that man over and over. Yeah, smack that guy with the toilet lid. This is fucking hatred levels of stupid, and I never thought I'd see Manhunt stoop to that level. Indeed, Danny is mostly doing this to people that are simply defending themselves. And whether or not you want to argue that Leo is the one in control in certain situations, you're still fucking controlling the killer. For example, Michael didn't do anything wrong. Your hand is forced into killing him because that's the route the game is forcing you to take. You're only killing him because he has the keys for the boat. That is the sole reason. But I think the holy grail of tastelessness goes to the moment right here. While Leo is screaming in your ear to kill everyone as you run from the police, a father steps onto his porch to defend his family. Leo urges you to kill him, even as his daughter is screaming in the background. Thankfully, you don't have to do it, but the fact that the game is actually insisting that you kill this man is frankly despicable. The final level attempts to explore Danny as a separate entity from Leo. This would have been a great way to end the game. Confronting Leo and killing him in order to force him out of Danny's mind once and for all is a neat concept. The problems arise when Leo sends out figments of Danny's previous victims, reliving everything that is wrong with this game's concept. And you bury Danny's dead wife, that Danny killed, even though Leo was in control. You know what? You see what I mean? You can't explore this in the realm of video games without putting a lot of people off. Because of all of this, it's impossible for me to give a flying fuck about Danny. It's impossible for me to empathize with him. He's a killer, regardless of what his mental state is like right now. There's films about serial killers out there. And in those situations, you're watching the killer and you're supposed to fear them, despite them being the focal point of the film. But in this game, you're forced to control them and you're forced to kill people who are usually innocent. All while one of the most ridiculous narratives I've ever seen and a poorly reasoned context for the violence revolve around the character. Look, I don't have a problem with video game violence as a concept. I love driving on the sidewalk and fighting off the police in Grand Theft Auto, or slaughtering a horde of demons mercilessly in Doom. Both of those games are absolutely ridiculous and aren't meant to be taken seriously. Even when Manhunt explored the darkest recesses of human curiosity, it was mostly to see the different executions. Everything else about the game was fucking disturbing, and that was brilliant. The problem I have stems from games that are tasteless when it comes to violence, as in killing for poorly contextualized or unapparent reasons. That's what Manhunt 2 boils down to. If there's anything to take away from this, it's that context is important. You can't make a game like this if you don't have anything of value to say, or if the context the violence is transpiring in isn't fleshed out. Hatred wanted to say that video game violence controversies are bullshit, and that it doesn't have any negative effects on us. That's just fine, but that's only the game's thesis. The meat of it is just shocking for the sake of being shocking. It's tasteless and edgy by a 12-year-old's standards. However, the first Manhunt dared to challenge the controversies by showing us the why and how of the violence not negatively affecting us. The game is a psychological horror game first and foremost, and it covered all of its bases. It has an intelligently crafted setting, and I've already explained why. As it stands with Manhunt 2, there was obvious neglect for anything the first game established. The shift from various Rockstar studios during development wouldn't have affected the game's direction because Christian Cantamessa, the lead writer and designer for the Manhunt series, was on board the whole time. The only conclusion I could come to was that they couldn't come up with a setting as brilliant as the first games, and settled with the best idea they had in order to make the damn thing. The shift in studios may have affected the gameplay because, oh boy, this game is pretty boring. Due to a number of reasons, Manhunt 2 ended up being very repetitive and boring. Unfortunately, even with Manhunt 2's shortcomings and its context and writing, it couldn't even stand on its own two legs as a fun or engrossing experience in the long run. For starters, hand-to-hand combat and gunplay have been buffed to hell and back, eliminating any semblance of horror or tension that could have been present. You can wail on enemies mercilessly without them attempting to fight back, even if they have a gun in their hands. Hell, you can even micromanage two enemies if you really wanted to. Hand-to-hand combat was something you wanted to avoid at all costs in the first game, but it took a great amount of skill and micromanagement to stand a chance against anyone. You'd have to guard effectively, grapple, and punch at the right times. And your health could drop insanely fast too. You could wriggle yourself out of those situations, but it's not advised. Stealth and executions are your best friends. And while that last statement might still be true for Manhunt 2, you can punch enemies till the cows come home. But what about gunplay? Well, I guess to compensate for the console versions of the game, when you're close enough your gun will automatically lock onto an enemy's head, allowing much easier headshots. Not only does this make the console versions a breeze to play through, but the PC version is laughable. Enemies drop like fucking flies thanks to this addition, completely ignoring the feeling of being against the world from the first game. If Rockstar wanted you to feel like a mass murderer, they succeeded. This is unbelievable. The game makes you feel like you can't be stopped. In Grand Theft Auto, a much more self-aware and batshit insane game, feeling like an unstoppable killing machine is a treat. But in a survival horror game where you play as a serial killer, you can see the problem, can't you? There's also miscellaneous issues like missions getting repetitive and the AI being some of the worst I've seen in a video game. And to be honest, I was fed up just over halfway through. The game at the very least can't even heighten its atmosphere through its brilliant presentation or soundtrack. The game is crippled by everything else. Even the graphics are worse than the first game. The original game had the snuff film setting to mask its low-quality visuals, and on top of that, the lighting and shadows were pretty damn impressive for the time. This game has legitimate cinematography, however, and it shows just how ugly this game is. And not the kind of ugly they were going for. Character mouths barely move, the lighting is only slightly above the originals, and the character models are... oh boy. Yeah, this game isn't salvageable. I can think of at least one moment where the game did legitimately freak me out in the way Rockstar was intending. The chapter Sexual Deviance, as previously described, has you exploring a sex cult's hangout for something that can help Danny remember his past. The generic club music and leather suits are throwaway attempts at creating a gang and atmosphere that rivaled any of the original game. At first, as you explore the depths of the hideout and run into the basement, you discover their murder dungeon. They film snuff videos and kill people down here for their own demented sexual gratification. This actually got to me, and I dissociated myself from this game's awful plot and setting here. Of course, it all plummets when you meet the doctor that has no reason to be there, but the dark atmosphere of this level is well crafted. And the shift in music as you get deeper in is nothing short of brilliant. Kudos once again to Craig Connor for his compositions. They're great. You know, I didn't want this video to be largely negative. I was hoping that Rockstar's follow-up to Manhunt would explore dark places and it would be, most of all, a mature commentary on violence in the interactive medium. But instead, what I got was one of the most repulsively edgy, lowbrow pieces of shit I've ever played. The game doesn't understand why the original game succeeded, and instead thrusts you into a world where you can't be stopped. Everyone falls before you, no matter who they might be, because you're a cold-hearted killer. That's bad. There is no reason a game should try to make you care about or connect with a serial killer. On top of that, its plot is nonsensical and can't engross you like the first game did due to its awful writing and far-fetched concept. The game is mind-numbing a lot of the time, and as an overall package, seems to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Or people with a legitimate snuff fetish. That could be true too. Manhunt 2 is an awful game, and I wouldn't recommend anyone play it even out of morbid curiosity. There is nothing of value here. It completely fails to understand how to contextualize the events that transpire in it, and it just isn't fun or scary. With that said, I would still like to see a Manhunt 3 one day. I have a feeling that with the right people behind it, Rockstar North, and with the right setting, characters, and mechanics, the game could once again be an amazing commentary on violence in the medium. But due to how games have evolved, I don't know if the violence in a hypothetical Manhunt 3 could be as disturbing as it wants to be without running into trouble with the ESRB again. Well, maybe that's not the case. Maybe violence in Manhunt 3 could be intimate but without excessive gore. Maybe it could exemplify the excruciating process of killing someone like The Last of Us does, for example. All that we can do now, as fans of the IP, is wait. And wait. And wait. And wait. And wait. And wait. I've been Liam Triforce, and I'd like to thank you for watching.
Oh,